for the streaming?
Well, it goes through that sound panel and then up through the speakers. Okay. So it's
all right.
Yeah. So all the people. All right, we'll go ahead and jump back in here. I think there might be a couple people still out in the hallway, but I'll grab them and let them know we're starting. A couple things that I set out back that I didn't mention before. The CCA sign-in sheet, I forgot to put that out before, so that's in there now. So if you want to give you credits there, go ahead and sign that up. So next we have Brad Lubben. Give you a little talk about Farm Bill payments and outlook.
That's right.
So you might have heard of Brad a few other times before, so it's good to have him back. You weren't here last year, but you're here I think the year before.
Right.
So again, thanks for coming back, and thanks for being here again today. So.
All right, Tyler, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for your participation this morning. Is this, if I remember right, this is the first of the series?
Third.
This is already the third of the series. So so I appreciate you being here and part of the overall series and our opportunity to talk a little bit of ag economics today. Alan's discussion to start the day on, relationships and sort of the human connection in agriculture is a critical piece of the overall management for the long run. Anything we talk about short run, about current markets or current production costs or decisions or farm programs, really just gets you from the short run to the long run. I appreciated the chance to hear Alan say it, and I've heard it before, but all these decisions are about getting to the long run, and he's talking long run issues. So good way to start the discussion. I will focus a little bit more on the shorter run here, the immediate outlook for farm programs and support, and as well as sort of the next few years of what might be, or what is supposed to be, the next Farm Bill. We'll talk a little bit about where we stand today, and that's explicitly in terms of current programs and what current support looks like. And we'll talk about where we are supposed to be going with what is supposed to be the 2018 Farm Bill. Today, remember what we currently operate with and what you effectively still will continue to operate with through the 2018 crop year, which means support paid in 2019. So there really are 2 more years of support here or 2 more years of programs and support here yet to think about. The ARC program, which most producers enrolled in Nebraska, overwhelmingly corn and soybean producers did, a lesser share of wheat base and sorghum base enrolled, but ARC very much started as a strong safety net early in this Farm Bill, and it was advertised at the time as a moving average, and that moving average has come down because prices have come down. And it means we knew that there was going to be lesser support at the end of this bill. PLC, the price loss coverage program, really didn't start with any support at all because prices were up here relative to that reference rate. As prices have fallen, that has become a substantial potential safety net for those that are enrolled, and also as a precursor to what you might think about in the next Farm Bill. To explain how those work, I've got a set of tables for you. I've got a set of graphs. They all rely on some price information and assumptions. The prices that we see, national average prices for the marketing year, 14, 15, and 16 are complete and done. The 2017 crop ends sometime this summer. In May or June for wheat, not till August for corn and soybeans and sorghum. So the 17 prices are not final, but there is a substantial amount of that price that's already effectively been set in the market. And we have some confidence about a relatively small band or range around that potential price as a final here. The 2018 price is purely a projection. It's not really even a forecast yet. It's sort of a projection, assuming that nothing fundamentally changes in terms of economics, nothing fundamentally changes in terms of shocks or other drivers in the market. That is a projection that comes from USDA's long-run projections. They'll officially be published next month, but the prices that go into those projections are already out and available. You can see where that's with relatively flat, relatively stable, albeit low price levels. If those are the projections we start with, then we can think about what PLC has done. And where we started with a 370 corn price, but we had a 370 reference price and there was a 0 payment rate. Over time, as prices have dropped, that payment rate's actually getting pretty substantial. It was even more substantial for grain sorghum. It was even more substantial for wheat. And then there's soybeans, which were at least treading water above the reference. And even as they've fallen, they're still sort of managing to hang in above those reference price levels of 840. So just look in the parentheses there, and that's the PLC payment rate. It's been growing for those acres that are enrolled in PLC. If I translated that payment rate into actual payments, this is what the average payment would have been on a PLC base acre. Payments start getting pretty big, albeit very few acres of corn, very few acres of soybeans enrolled in the program. This is based on an average yield across the entire, average payment yield across the entire state. So it's not any one person's payment, but payment rates are growing substantially. Grain, sorghum, and wheat payment rates are substantial as well. Now compare that to PLC, or compare that to ARC rather. The ARC program is based on a moving average revenue. Remember, a 5-year Olympic average yield and a 5-year Olympic average price, and then a guarantee that was set at 86% of that calculation. If you translate that into a 5-year Olympic average price here, the 5-year Olympic average price when we went into the 2014 crop year was $5.29. If the guarantee protected 86% of that average, that was effectively protection that kicked in around $4.50. And when you had prices drop into $3.70, that was a substantial payment on the difference. That average has gradually come downhill, but prices were dropping too, and so we still saw big payments on the 14 crop, the 15 crop, and even the 16 crop that was paid last fall. Now, that average is getting down to the point that even at lower prices, we're not really in the money in terms of big payments. If I calculate average payments on ARC, the 14, 15, 16 crop, this is the average payment, the simple average of every payment rate that actually went out the door. Payments were big, in the $50 range on corn as a statewide average. Payments were substantial on grain sorghum. Payments started substantial on soybeans. They've quickly withered away to almost nothing. And then you look ahead for corn, for soybeans, payments looking ahead. 17 crop are very small, maybe. And on the 18 crop are essentially zero. Payments on grain, sorghum, and wheat still will hold some weight there and some money. But we're talking about much smaller payments going forward in ARC than we had in the past. And as a comparison, PLC would start to pay much bigger payments. I can put it on a graph. It's easier to sort of think of the story. Recognize that, as I said, if we use corn as the example, the average price started high. That meant that the effective protection we had was substantially higher than where this old PLC reference price is at. Now that prices have trended down, we're getting to the point that the PLC reference would provide more support going forward than the ARC guarantee. That's true on corn. That's true on sorghum. Soybeans may be the one crop where even though the price has trended down, we're still playing around in above reference price levels to the point that ARC versus PLC be a wash going forward. It was also true on wheat where we effectively started at lower price levels relative to the reference. And we've made substantial payments on PLC enrollment on wheat. If I translate that into dollars, this is dollars that have been delivered in Nebraska on farm program payments. Substantial crop program payments in 15. That was the ARC payments on the 14 crop that were paid in 15. Better than $600 million. Even bigger payments in 15 or in 16 on the 15 crop. And even still substantial payments in 17 on the 16 crop. We've had better than $600 million in Nebraska each year, primarily from the ARC program. Our best projection today, if you finish at current price levels and if you finish at sort of general yield results, we might see around $200 million in payments, a third this year. Our projection for 2019, based on the 2018 crop, there might be less than $70 million in payments. We are very quickly weaning ourselves away from farm program payments looking forward here. And that's even with a change in the Farm Bill to come or projected. There are still 2 pretty lean years here of trying to manage through a smaller safety net. Now, 2020 is a projection I've made. It would be a substantial rebound, maybe as much as $500 million. That is sort of a foreshadowing of the expectation that producers would make a new decision under a new Farm Bill for the 19 crop that would be paid in 2020. And we'll show that here in a moment. That translates into broader net farm income numbers. We've fallen to the lows here in 2016, according to USDA statistics and my projections translated into Nebraska. A little bit of recovery in net farm income in 17, right around a $4 billion net farm income in the state this past year. Now, compared to the average of 2000 to 2010, $4 billion's not far off. It's almost on trend. Compared to the 2011 and 2013 record income levels, $4 billion's almost a 50% decline in farm income. It's one of those management questions is this impossible to survive, or is it just the shock that's really tough to deal with? And of course, that shock also helped propel up input costs on everything from purchased inputs to land, and some of those costs haven't retracted and haven't adjusted to the shock here. But the picture ahead, it's hard to project something substantial. And in fact, most projections are fairly stable. Projected market prices, projected income, and projected returns here to agriculture. This is the Nebraska picture. The U.S. picture looks much the same. It fundamentally sets up the stage for this Farm Bill debate. And I want to talk about what's ahead for the Farm Bill. There's a budget challenge, clearly. There are some challenges in terms of what's being pushed and what's being argued and where we need to make investments. And then there are some very specific issues of how to address this program issue or how to change that program and so forth. I want to set this up, however, and think about 2 fundamental challenges to what this next Farm Bill is going to look like. And if I can, I'll back up one slide first to think about the economic picture. We passed or wrote the 2014 Farm Bill here in 2014, but it was really written at a time when it was supposed to start in 2012. So we were debating this past Farm Bill back here in good times. And while prices had already fallen by the time the 14 Farm Bill was passed, sort of the framework for the debate was about writing a Farm Bill for relatively good times. The 2008 Farm Bill was written for good times. We have to go back to 2002 to find a Farm Bill that was written for low prices. And that was written coming off of 4 years of really low prices and emergency support and additional funding to provide a safety net. 1996 was written for projections of very good times and market opportunities. 1990 was written for an improving economy. It wasn't, you have to go back again to 1985 to find a Farm Bill that was really written for low prices and burdensome supplies. So if 2018 is a Farm Bill written for the current times, you really have to go back to 2002 and 1985 to find similar sort of frameworks for the debate. How do you write a safety net that fits for the lean times as opposed to how do you make program changes that fit in good times? That's one challenge, writing a Farm Bill for down times. The other challenge, how do you write a Farm Bill without any new money? In 2002, we wrote a Farm Bill for down times. We added $70 billion of new spending to the Farm Bill. And that helped increase the safety net and pay for other things as well. We're now being asked to write a farm bill, at best, on a flat budget. The 2014 Farm Bill actually had to come up with a budget cut. Well, it was written in good times. You eliminated direct payments. You used some of the savings to make the other changes that were wanted. Now we're writing a farm bill with no new money and for lean times. That's the challenge of what the next bill looks like. And it's not just that there's no new money, it's just that there are 4 titles that swallow up roughly 99% of total farm bill spending. Commodity programs, crop insurance programs, conservation programs, and food assistance. And there's clearly a big brother amongst those 4. Food assistance is about 75 to 80% of total spending in the Farm Bill. This is the baseline projection from the Congressional Budget Office. Every 6 months or so, they publish a new projection that looks forward 10 years. What would programs cost if we just kept everything in place as we have it today? That's what the projection would be to go forward 10 years as of last June. We're waiting on CBO's January forecast to probably be the official baseline from which the Farm Bill debate starts. But it'll look much like this, and food assistance will take 75 to 80% of the total. How do you write a budget with no new money when 75 to 80% of it's over there? It's almost like, well, Big Brother has most of the toys, right? There has been some debate about if you could separate out these programs. Let's have a food bill, let's have a farm bill. Without the food bill, the farm bill would certainly be much smaller. Some would argue and hope that, well, it's smaller, it would be easier to pass. I would make the counter argument that says, yeah, I know Big Brother has most of the toys. But if Big Brother's not in the room, the little kids don't get any of the toys. You get to share when he's in the room, and if he leaves the room, I'm guessing there won't be much support at all for the farm portion of a farm bill. Yes, sir?
Really, billions? So there's 750 billion a year?
That's really billions. That is the 10-year projection, 10-year cost. So food assistance is about 68 billion per year. So the projection here, as I said, over 10 years. Commodity programs, about 60 billion. Crop insurance is about 80 billion. Conservation is about 60 billion. So think 6 to 8 billion a year at current projections. Now, that's the picture here for the Farm Bill budget. Let's take nutrition off the table because, yes, it's Big Brother, and yes, Big Brother has most of the toys, but little brother and little brothers don't get to play with them unless Big Brother's in the room. I don't see a way that you find a way to cut nutrition in order to save money so that all the little brothers can have more to play with. So take nutrition off the table. There will be proposals to reform nutrition as either part of the Farm Bill debate or as part of some entitlement reform or spending reform. But even today, it's an acknowledgement that says, if we save money in nutrition by changing these rules or fixing those loopholes, it's to put more back in nutrition in other places. It's not to push it somewhere else. So let's look at the other 3, commodities, crop insurance, conservation. Each of them have substantial questions, substantial issues here that we'll play with in this next Farm Bill debate. Commodity programs. Here's a potpourri of issues that we're likely to deal with. On ARC, we're going to deal with the yield issue because there is a substantial debate across the country, particularly across certain regions, where they see the ARC program as not working correctly or as an unfair program because payment rates vary substantially from county to county. I will show you that that's partly by design. It's supposed to work that way because it's a county-based guarantee. It's also partly a function of some concerns about the quality of the yield data. The yield data collected by survey from NASS versus potentially using yield data collected by reporting to the crop insurance company. So there's a lot of debate about which set of yield data to use. I could also argue it's a debate about how long of a yield history to use. A 5-year history, which is actually an Olympic average, so you throw out the high, you throw out the low, it's really 3 numbers. That's a really short look back in terms of calculating a moving average. A longer history might give you a more consistent calculation. But we're gonna have some debate on that. I would argue the biggest debate about ARC is probably not how to fix the yield formula. The biggest debate about ARC is whether you're gonna have a choice. And everybody expects that at this time next year, we will either have a new farm bill or an extension of the current program. But either way, it will come with a new choice between ARC and PLC. And having a choice could substantially change your decision about what program to enroll in and what kind of support to expect going forward. There are other issues up here. I mentioned dairy and cotton because they are fundamentally monumental budgetary challenges to try and get a farm bill off the ground and get it forward. Dairy pushed for and got a substantial change in how their safety net worked in the last farm bill. But it doesn't work nearly as effectively or as strongly as they were pushing for, and they're really pushing for changes to the program that would cost money. Cotton, even more so. Nobody's growing cotton up here, right? Tyler, we're not growing cotton.
Nope.
Maybe if climate keeps warming, we're not yet. Yeah, we might start someday, but we're not growing cotton. But if you go about 300 miles south of here and 200, 300 miles south of here, and you start getting into cotton country, cotton has this fundamental issue. In the last farm bill, they abandoned the commodity program to satisfy the WTO complaint with Brazil. And they pushed for a crop insurance supplemental program as a replacement. They didn't get exactly what they wanted in that either, but they did get a supplemental crop insurance program. Now that they're not in the commodity title and they have this supplemental crop insurance that they're not happy about either, they've been pushing to get back in the commodity title. Well, you can't just come back in with the cotton program because that would seem to be a direct violation of the trade complaint that they had to settle in the first place. So they have proposed a cotton seed program, not a cotton program. You know, when they harvest it, the cotton seed is still attached to the cotton, so it still kind of looks like one crop. But they're arguing for support for cotton seed as opposed to cotton. They're pushing for support. They may find that support yet in a budget bill before we get to the farm bill. The other issue here to mention, on the conservation side, a substantial debate about the future of the CRP. Does it shrink? Does it grow? What do we do from this point? It's gotten much smaller, and the question is, where is it going to go from here? I did not mention crop insurance because it's not specifically about things that definitely need to be changed in crop insurance. In fact, producer groups, when they were commenting at Farm Bill hearings, would all say that crop insurance is the #1 priority. And the single biggest ask was do no harm. Just don't change it. Don't mess it up. There are other interest groups that are pushing for cuts in the way the program works or in terms of who's eligible for it. But it's not specifically on the list here of things to fix. It may be on the list of things that are targets. Okay. Let me talk a bit more about ARC payments. Yes, Tyler?
If there's an extension, that there's a chance to re-choose.
To re-choose as well, correct.
Do the price points change? Reference prices change?
No, we'll see some numbers and sort of explain why that decision may be substantial. You bet. I mentioned one of the issues here is about how the ARC program currently works. And I tried to come up with the data to demonstrate some of the issues. This is the 2016 ARC payment that was paid last fall. Just looking at the counties where there's a single payment rate in the county for all acres, not a separate irrigated and non-irrigated practice. I've got those maps as well, but we just looked at this one. Yeah, there's a lot of variance in payment rates across county lines. Some of that's a function of, yield histories means that larger or better yield histories have a better guarantee, more production. Some of these single yield counties are predominantly irrigated. Some of these single yield counties are predominantly non-irrigated. So there is a lot of difference in productivity between counties, and thus a difference in the overall guarantee level. But even amongst neighbors, and I can think of my neighbors back home between Cass County and Otoe County, and there's certainly a focus on, well, there's different payment rate in each county. Why is it so variable? You can find better examples here of payment rates, 74 cents versus 49 across the county line. There's substantial changes in payment rates across county lines. There's a lot of debate about, is that fair? Maybe we should equalize those. Maybe we should sort of smooth them out so that we don't have this discrepancy across county lines. We could smooth them all the way out and make it a single payment rate in the entire state. But that was the acre program that we had in the 2008 Farm Bill. And most producer groups said that payment rate was not good enough. We needed something more to the local county. So we got a county program, and now we're complaining about the fact that county rates vary. That's the payment rate, and that's the coffee shop talk, to use the same metaphor that Alan mentioned earlier, because that's what we know how to talk about. But if you take that payment rate and you add it to actual crop revenue, and then you compare that to the guarantee, the counties with the bigger payments are the counties that come in the most short of their guarantee. By definition, the payment only happens if there's a loss, and the payment's only on 85% of the acres, and it's only subject to the 10% of the benchmark, and it's subject to payment limits, et cetera, et cetera. The payment is only partial payment on the loss. And so if you add payment plus revenue, the producers with better crops and better revenue and smaller payments are better off than the producer that got the bigger payment. So do you want to win the coffee shop argument about who got the bigger payment, or do you want to win the bank account argument about who actually came in? Focus right now on trying to fix the payment rate and sort of forgetting about where that fits in the overall portfolio. We will most likely in a new bill change how that yield payment is calculated, or how that yield rate is calculated. And the first proposed change is to go to crop insurance yields, to abandon the survey-based yields from NASS and to use the yields that are reported to crop insurance. That may, in fact, substantially improve because of partial responses to surveys versus theoretically in some crops 80 to 90% coverage of crop insurance, which means that you're effectively getting almost complete yield response. There are some counties where crop insurance participation is not high. There are some crops where it's not high. There are some minor crops where we don't have good coverage in some places. We're still going to have gaps, and we're still going to have data questions. But there's a good chance that we're moving towards using the crop insurance yields instead. I mentioned the bigger question is about ARC versus PLC. It's not about how do we fix ARC. If we look at corn, and we have a new decision on the 2019 crop, and if we get a new farm bill, most are expecting very little changes to the basic support levels of ARC and PLC, just the tweaking how it works. If we stick with the same reference price levels in a new farm bill, or if we extend the current program, you're going to be comparing a 370 reference price for corn under PLC versus what is effectively a 370 Olympic average price for corn under ARC. But under ARC, it's an Olympic average yield times an Olympic average price times 86%. If you lump that all into price, 370 times 86% is about 318 in that dotted blue line. If we're projecting no better than mid $3 corn through the life of the next farm bill, we're going to be stuck with an Olympic average that sits at 370 because that's the minimum in the formula. And we're going to be comparing effectively 326 or 318 protection under ARC versus 370 protection under PLC. We can get out the analysis tools and decide which one you want to use, but I'm not sure we need much of a spreadsheet to figure that one out. I expect this decision next year. Nobody expects that, even if we have to extend the current bill, nobody expects that somehow we'll be locked into the same program that we're already in. In 2013, we extended the 2008 Farm Bill for a year. We made a new decision on acre versus DCP. That precedent has given everybody the expectation that in 2019, we will have a new decision again. So there could very well be a wholesale change in farm program participation, from better than 95% of corn base acres that enrolled in ARC to maybe better than 90% of base acres enrolled in PLC. That's corn. Soybeans, I don't know. The moving average price, well, the price projections, again from USDA, have us somewhere in the $9 to $10 range. So an Olympic average is hanging in at that level. It means the 86% of Olympic average is somewhere in the 820 range. 820 protection under ARC, 840 protection under PLC. I don't know which one's going to provide better downside support. ARC is more responsive to current conditions. PLC is tied to a payment yield that's not 100%, et cetera, et cetera. So fundamentally, there might be almost a 50-50 wash here between ARC and PLC for soybean producers on those soybean base acres. We will need those tools and do some good analysis next year to figure out which way to proceed here. Now, having said that those projections sort of tell us what to do for the next farm bill, I have to qualify that with their projections. And like any good economist, we can make lots of projections. So I've tried to compare what USDA has projected in their long-run baseline over a period of time here against the actual market price. So if you see the black line through there, that's the current market price, the actual market price for corn through the 2017 projection that we have today. The various colored lines are the baseline, the 10-year projected baseline that USDA published in various years. What's it fundamentally tell me? Back when we were dealing with $2 corn in the early 2000s, all of the long-run projections said, well, we're going to live with $2 to $2.50 corn. We don't have a good economic reason to believe something different. And then we saw two energy bills that really did help propel the bioenergy sector forward. And we saw growing demand, and we saw market opportunity. And even in the 2008-2009 period, well, we had ratcheted up to $4 corn, but nobody projected it much further. And so the projections, well, were kind of around $4 corn. And then we ended up with sort of the peak of the rally, and we're up in the $6 to $7 range. The best projections at that time said, well, we are not going to live at $7. We're going to fall back, but maybe we fall back to a $4 to $5 range. Instead, we're back in the low $3 range. And now the projection says we're at $3.20, and at best we get back to something like $3.60. What do I take from this? We don't know how to predict shocks. Economists are very good at predicting straight lines. We could not have predicted the market, the commodity rally in the 2000s. We certainly couldn't have predicted the peak. And apparently we weren't very good at predicting how low the trough was either. So all those projections about exactly how programs would work going forward recognize that it essentially assumes that nothing shocking is going to happen going forward. We live with basic productivity gains and population and demand growth and very little other change. And I mean, isn't that the world we live in? Nothing shocking happens day to day, right? Heck, today we got to wake up every morning and see what the tweet of the day was, just to figure out what direction the country's headed. I can't tell you for sure where we're going to be with 10 years from now. I can't tell you for sure when the Farm Bill will get dealt with. Heck, I can't even tell you today whether government will be closed tomorrow or not. Yeah. Yeah. So we've caught it, right? On average, we're.
Well, the banker always says the ground is worth more. And he said, no, it's only worth $200 an acre. That's all I'm gonna.
Yeah.
We lend it on.
Yeah.
No,
If you accept that shocks happen, and there tends to be a lag in recovering from any shock, maybe we're actually back to something of a sustainable level where we know demand will kick in. So is there a $2 forecast on the horizon? It's hard to imagine what would happen to kill demand that much more. Although we could mess up trade and we could mess up lots of things. Is there a $4 or $5 forecast on the horizon? That takes a lot of new trade development or new demand growth that we haven't factored in yet either. Or it takes a supply shock somewhere. Hopefully not here, right? So I can't tell you how good or how confident to be in these price levels, but just recognize this is the baseline from which that analysis starts. If we saw substantial price recovery, suddenly all that leaning towards PLC isn't as relevant anymore. If we get back above 370 corn, none of the programs are going to pay really in the immediate future. So the comparison here is dependent upon price projection. Let me talk about the conservation side of this a bit as well, with the focus on CRP. CRP has shrunk over time since about 2007, when it peaked out around 37 million acres. We have taken 13 million acres out of the CRP, much of it back into crop production, some of it back into grassland and grazing production, some of it into non-ag uses. But we've taken 13 million acres out of the CRP, and we've taken the cap down as we've gone along. From a 39 million acre cap to a 32 million acre cap in the 2008 Farm Bill, to a 24 million acre cap in the 2014 Farm Bill. We are really scraping by just under the cap, just enough room to keep enrolling acres that are enrolled in the continuous CRP provisions, where you don't compete in a bidding process, you simply apply and enroll in a continuous fashion. In fact, we even had to put the continuous enrollment on table them for several months because we had to wait for other CRP acres to expire in September before they could actually add some of those new continuous acres. 24 million acre cap. The continuous CRP keeps growing at 500,000 acres a year or better. It means the general CRP, those whole fields, the large acreage enrollments, the ones that competitively bid in every so often, they're going to come back out. They're going to keep coming out. We're not going to see much land bid back into the CRP going forward. Every time we have expiring acreage, we're going to have to take 2 or 3 acres out for every acre that might bid its way back in. Now, there have been pushes in some circles for growing the CRP. In some cases, let's grow a temporary CRP for 5 years or so. In some cases, let's expand the cap and grow the CRP back. Clearly, a large driver in some of those debates is let's grow the CRP, get some acres out of production that would help support price levels. But you also clearly have large proponents of a bigger CRP that value the wildlife habitat, the conservation effects, et cetera. We don't see a way to grow the CRP. Obviously, you can't grow it without new money. So growing the cap is almost a non-starter unless you find a way to save money in the program. And one of the proposals is to move forward with a smaller payment rate so that you can save money on paper and push that into a larger acreage enrollment. Same dollars, just smaller payment rate, maybe more acres. I can argue probably as many groups that are against changing the cap as are for increasing it. But if it increases, it's probably going to come with an adjustment in the payment rate for new contracts going forward. That's a very brief look at Farm Bill issues. Commodity program issues, 2019. Some conservation program issues where the CRP is the biggest question. I haven't even touched on all the other policy questions that extend far beyond the Farm Bill. Trade, I don't know where we're at on trade. I think the ag community fully understands, and most in the ag community clearly are pushing for trade opportunities and trade growth, and clearly don't mess with agreements that already work. And yet the administration is pushing a very hard negotiating position that is either foolish and in danger of sort of destroying the existing opportunities that we have, or it is the most absolute best negotiating strategy which you can have, which is to take it to the brink and get the other guy to blink first. The promise is to withdraw from NAFTA. The promise fulfilled of withdrawing from TPP. Now the promise to withdraw from NAFTA unless it can be done successfully. It's not clear where we're going to head up or where we're going to end up with trade. But it is clearly an issue that ag is watching closely. On the regulatory side, we have seen substantial pullback in terms of new regs and in terms of proposed pullback of existing regs. And so there has been some regulatory relief in the past year. On the tax side, we actually did accomplish a tax bill. We don't exactly know everything it means for agriculture yet. We know one provision that's got agriculture in a real conundrum at the moment that affects co-ops and tax provisions that will probably get fixed here shortly. But fundamentally, taxes is one thing on that list where you can say Congress did actually achieve something this past year. Entitlement reform sounds like it's coming next. And one of the questions here, one of the challenges here is think of the tax bill as an example. If I put up an income statement for the federal government, there's about $4 billion plus of actual spending. And there's about 3.4 or so billion of revenues. So you make up the difference in borrowing. That's 600 billion plus deficit. The spending side is taxes. Well, we just passed a tax reform bill that achieves many of the political preferences to try and reduce the tax side of the ledger. Go to the spending side of the ledger. If you're going to do anything about the deficit, on the spending side of the ledger, well, there's interest. We can't mess with that. There's defense. And if you're on the far right wing of the aisle, you're not going to cut defense. There's the social safety net, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, healthcare, et cetera. If you're on the far left side of the aisle, you don't want to cut that. That leaves this. That leaves all the domestic programs, including farm programs, and transportation and infrastructure, and education, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard to figure out where they're going to cut or where they would push, but it puts pressure on everything that's debated. I don't know that we'll see much substantial impact here very shortly or very soon, but we may well be moving from an era of we focused on taxes, we actually got something done. Now the focus is on fundamental spending reform. And that means pressure on everything, including farm programs as we know it. Don't forget energy, don't forget infrastructure, don't forget healthcare, don't forget immigration, as if those are small issues here. And then I put one down here that doesn't fit in this standard sort of government policy outlook, but don't forget the pressure that we're seeing from consumers and interest groups that don't end up in legislation and statute, but they simply end up in directives from retailers and food processors that drive back to demands on producers. That may well push our agenda much further and sort of shape our production system much further than any regulatory decision out of Washington does. With those all being laid out there, albeit with not many answers, but with all those being laid out there to keep your eye on, think about how the current farm programs fit into your portfolio. And I really do like this bullet point here. I wrote it, I really do like it, but I want to stress it. You face a portfolio of risks. Remember to manage that portfolio of risks with a portfolio of tools. It is not, as I said, about the farm program payment. Winning the farm program payment game isn't a particularly satisfying victory. By the same token, it's not about trying to win the crop insurance game. Hooray, I got the greatest indemnity, right? Or I got more back in indemnities that have paid in premiums. That's not a good solution. It's not about the marketing game. My hedging account ends up in the black because prices went down, because I hate margin calls, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's not about the production game. The only way to work your way through low prices is maximum yields. So you want to spend $5 on the last input that gets you $3 corn back? You know, it's not about trying to maximize production. It's not about trying to win the marketing game. It's not about trying to get more out of insurance than you put in it. And it's not about trying to get the biggest government program payment. It's about managing the entire portfolio. The successful farmer idea is to figure out every one of those and manage them sort of jointly, not trying to win every single game. So manage a portfolio of risks with a portfolio of tools. Prepare for the uncertainty ahead. I don't know about the fate of the next farm bill. From somewhat a cynical optimist perspective, I'm not sure if that's really possible, but the older I get, the more cynical I'm getting. But I'm still optimistic that says we'll get a farm bill done on time this year, because the cynic in me says Congress has to get something done so that they can claim success when they go home and campaign before the fall election. If that's the only reason to be optimistic, I'm not sure that's good, but there's a good reason to think that we'll actually get a farm bill done on time. We don't fight over new money. We make tweaks. We push forward fundamentally the programs that we have, and we get it done. Now, just in the last 2 weeks, I've also heard several politicians say, the chances of getting this done on time are looking pretty slim. We're likely just to extend the current bill. Okay, either way, extend the current bill, prepare for the uncertainty and prepare for the decision that's going to come ahead here next year. Finally, we're going to do education and information on this new farm bill. We're going to start here in a little bit over a month with some education focused on understanding what's in the new bill or what's in the new proposal that might come to pass. One switch on the schedule here, March 8th up at Meade, is actually going to be March 5th. We've just made that switch. The governor announced the governor's ag conference for March 7 and 8, so we decided not to try and compete directly. March 7th in Hastings will actually be done in time that somebody could head off to the ag conference just after. But we'll be circuiting around Nebraska here in early March. Myself and a team from K-State will do this, and we'll be down there the week before that. So we're going to talk about Farm Bill alternatives, analysis, and what those options or what those discussions might lead to. We will certainly come back when we have new legislation or an extension of current legislation. We'll be coming back in the coming year with substantial analysis and education on what's in the new bill at that time too. So that's the discussion for this morning. Let me leave it at that. I'll just leave it on that last slide. Let me leave it at that and take any questions or comments as we have time, Tyler.
Sure. Anyone have questions or anything?
Yes, sir.
We were looking at trends in commodity prices. Can't predict shocks. I'm just wondering about your thoughts on the ethanol retirement, renewable fuel, and the
Right. I can say that projection from USDA was built effectively assuming that current policy stays in place. Clearly, there's a fight between corn states and oil states right now, or more specifically, corn state senators and oil state senators about the future of policy. And it's holding up good people from appointments in DC at the moment, too. There's a real sort of dichotomy of this fundamental debate about policy. From the biofuel perspective that argues about the oil industry's perspective. We passed energy legislation in 05 and 07 that set biofuel mandates that were clearly above and beyond some 10% consumption level. You can't simultaneously claim that legislation tells us to get beyond 10%, but the blend wall is impossible to overcome, and therefore we should basically revise the legislation, revise the regulation. If the regulation says you're supposed to get beyond 10%, then you can't claim that the 10% blend wall is a reason not to live with the regulation. We could get beyond 10%. Maybe it's as simple as E15. We could get beyond 10% with more flex fuel vehicles, or we could get beyond 10% with more infrastructure. The argument that says we'll never get beyond 10% is just a red herring. On the other side, it's also true that if oil prices, we've seen oil prices move back to $40, $60 a barrel now, but that's bringing production back online up in the Bakkens and elsewhere. So biofuels have to compete economically with oil. If biofuels can't compete economically, then we're always going to have an argument that says, well, that's causes economic harm to society, and that's a reason to cut the mandate. So I don't see a good reason to cut the mandate going forward today. But if biofuel doesn't eventually compete economically, then I don't see the mandate living forever either. So the short run is the mandate's there, the demand's there. And then you need a good analysis to figure out, well, how much of the current biofuel demand is really driven by the mandate and how much of it's really driven by pure economics. I think $60 oil and $3.20 corn, I think we'd use all the ethanol we can produce. So I don't think there's economic constraints. That equation's not as simple with biodiesel and soybean oil. And we're sort of living year to year on, do we have the biodiesel tax credit or don't we? I want to do better analysis before I come to a conclusion there, but eventually economics has to work its way out.
Seems like a significant factor in the answer of the corn crop.
That sounds about right. 40% of the corn crop may go to ethanol. Of course, a third of that comes back as feed. So the real displacement of corn may be closer to 25% of the crop or something. And, we found the acres. We took them away from wheat or grain sorghum. We took them out of the CRP. We've figured out how to us back in 2008, 2009, when the debate was that the biofuel usage drove up food prices. And all the analysis says there's not much impact here, direct causation of biofuel policy driving up food prices, because we are very good at expanding production. Now, if you took biofuel policy away overnight and you took that demand out, there have been recent analysis that say we could lose another 50, 60 cents on corn or more. So now that we've ramped up production, we're not very good at ramping it back down. And the impact of a negative shock would be bigger than any of the impact of growing it here in the first place. So short run outlook, pretty stable. long run outlook, eventually we have to compete economically. Yep.
Answered it all.
Okay, I guess so.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Well, that's it for today. I was out.